You never forget the night your life breaks. It doesn't fade. It doesn't soften. It stays sharp, like a memory carved into bone. And for me, that night began with a love so deep, so trusting, that I didn't see the storm forming behind the eyes of the woman I thought would never hurt me. Hannah wasn't just someone I loved. She was the future I imagined every time I looked ahead. She was the reason I worked until my hands ached. The reason I believed life could still be beautiful even when everything else felt difficult. I trusted her in a way most people never trust anyone. With her, I didn't have doubts. I didn't question. I didn't fear. I believed she saw me, truly saw me, and that she would always stand beside me. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe when you love someone too deeply, you don't notice the cracks forming beneath their silence. Maybe you forget that love can break you harder than hate ever will. That night started quietly. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. It was the type of night where you don't expect your entire world to collapse. I was at home, exhausted but peaceful, thinking about the plans Hannah and I had made for the weekend. I remember feeling grateful. I remember feeling safe. Then the pounding on my door shattered everything. Not gentle knocking. Not someone calling my name. It was the kind of pounding that sends fear straight into your spine before your mind understands why. Heavy fists, urgent voices, shadows moving behind the glass. When I opened the door, the hallway filled with police officers. Flashlights shot into my home, cutting through the dark like blades. And at the center of it stood Officer Daniel. His face was unreadable, but his eyes carried something I couldn't place. Sadness, disappointment, maybe even guilt. He asked me for my name like he didn't already know it. Then he told me they had a warrant, told me they needed to search the house, told me there had been a serious crime. My stomach twisted. My mind went blank. But I stepped aside because I had nothing to hide. I thought it was a misunderstanding, a mistake someone would fix in a few minutes. But then I saw her, Hannah, standing behind the officers, crying, but not moving, not reaching for me, not stepping forward like the woman who used to hold my hand when I was stressed or tired or hurting. Her tears didn't fall for me. They fell for something else. Guilt, fear, maybe the weight of what she'd already done. Hannah, what's going on? I asked her, but she didn't answer. She couldn't even look at me. The officers tore through my house. Drawers slammed open. Boxes were emptied. Personal things were yanked out and held up like evidence in a courtroom. Every second felt unreal, like I was watching someone else's life from far away. And then Officer Daniel told me what they found. Evidence. Items I had never seen. Things that tied me directly to a crime I didn't even understand. My ears rang. My chest tightened. The room seemed to tilt. But I didn't fight them, because in my heart, I still believed Hannah would speak. I still believed she would say, "He didn't do this. You're making a mistake." I waited for her voice. I waited for her courage. But all I got was silence. And her silence betrayed me more brutally than the handcuffs ever could. When they grabbed my wrists, my younger sister Lily burst into the room. She looked terrified, shaking, crying so hard she could barely get the words out. "My brother didn't do anything. You can't take him. He didn't do this." Her voice cracked in a way that made the officers hesitate for half a second. But duty always wins over innocence. They pulled me away from her like I was a danger to the people I loved most. Robin arrived next, asking questions, demanding explanations, trying to protect me the way he always did. But no one listened. No one cared. The story had already been written, and someone had made sure they wrote my name on every page. They told me to turn around. Cold metal closed around my wrists. And in that moment, I looked at Hannah one last time. I waited for her to break. I waited for her to shout the truth. I waited for her to step between me and the officers and say, "Stop, you've got this wrong." But she didn't move. She just cried quietly, like she was watching a man she barely knew instead of the man she had once claimed to love. As they dragged me outside, I saw neighbors staring through their windows. People I had helped, laughed with, lived beside for years. People who looked at me now like they had always suspected something dark inside me. And still, I said nothing. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't fight. Because love makes you foolish. It makes you believe that the person you trusted most would never set fire to the life you built together. Inside the interrogation room, that illusion died completely. They showed me files, videos, photos, messages. Every piece of evidence pointing directly at me. Every item placed so carefully, so intentionally. By someone who knew me well enough to frame me perfectly. Someone who knew exactly where to plant the knife. I kept thinking about Hannah. Her shaking hands. Her red eyes. The way she couldn't meet my gaze. And slowly, painfully, the truth started crawling in. She did this. She planned it. She chose herself over me. But even then, I fought the thought. I told myself she was scared, pressured, confused. I held on to excuses like they were lifelines, because the alternative was too painful to accept. Hours passed. The questions didn't stop. The walls felt smaller. The future felt darker. And when they finally told me the judge had approved my transfer to prison, something inside me crumbled. On the way out, I saw Lily again, crying, reaching for me, her hands shaking as she tried to grab my arm. Officers pushed her back gently, but she fought them with everything she had. "Ethan, please, you didn't do anything. Please." Her voice broke me more than the handcuffs, more than the accusations, more than the betrayal. I looked at my house one last time, at the doorway where Hannah once said she loved me, at the windows where she waited for me after work, at the home I built with every intention of sharing my life with her. And for a moment, I imagined her running toward me, screaming the truth, undoing the damage. But she didn't. People who betray you don't save you. They watch you fall and leave you to bleed. As the prison gates opened, I walked inside with the last fragile hope still whispering in my chest. She wouldn't do this to me, but she did. And that was the night my life was stolen. You don't really understand what loneliness is until the gates close behind you and the world forgets you exist. The first night in prison feels like being dropped into a place where time stops, but pain somehow keeps moving. You lie on a hard mattress that feels colder than the floor. You stare at a concrete ceiling that never blinks, never softens. And for the first time in your life, you realize nobody is coming to check on you. Nobody is coming to hold you steady. Nobody is coming at all. I kept waiting for that sound. The guard calling my name, telling me Hannah had come to see me, telling me she still believed in me. But the days passed, then the weeks, and her silence hit me harder than any cell door ever could. The isolation breaks you slowly. You start counting the walls, memorizing cracks, just to give your mind something to hold on to. Shame crawls under your skin like something alive. Every night you ask yourself the same question. How did my life fall apart this fast? And with every sunrise behind bars, the answer becomes clearer. Life doesn't fall apart, people do. In the middle of all that darkness, something strange happened. A guard handed me a thin white envelope with handwriting I barely recognized. It was from Olivia. Short, simple letters. But they became the only voice reminding me I wasn't completely erased from the world. I reread them so many times the paper began to tear. And even though she didn't say much, every word felt like someone was reaching a hand to me through the bars. You need something like that when you're drowning. Even the smallest hand can keep you from sinking. But prison isn't just loneliness. It's people. Broken people. Dangerous people. Lost people. And you either learn to read them fast, or you get eaten alive. That's when I met Richard. He was older, calm, the kind of man whose silence spoke louder than most people's shouting. I didn't trust him at first. I didn't trust anyone. But Richard had the strange ability to see straight through you. Not in a threatening way, but like he'd lived your pain before you even felt it. He told me something that stuck with me, not as wisdom, but as a warning. If you let your anger control you in here, you won't survive long enough to see who you really need to fight. Richard wasn't gentle. He didn't talk much, but he taught me how to breathe when every cell in my body was screaming. He taught me how to look at a man and know whether he wanted to hurt me, use me, or leave me alone. He taught me that silence isn't weakness. Sometimes, it's the last shield you have left. Then there was Daniel, a walking explosion. Quick hands, quicker temper. The kind of guy who tests you just to see where you break. The first time he tried to provoke me, I almost snapped. I almost gave him exactly what he wanted. A fight that would bury me deeper into this hell. But Richard stepped between us, calm as ever, and said, "Not today." That moment changed everything. Daniel didn't back down because he respected me. He backed down because he saw I wasn't scared of him. After that, something shifted. He still cursed, still pushed, still tried to get under my skin. But gradually, in the strangest possible way, he became someone I understood. Someone who'd been betrayed by everyone he ever loved. Like me. You don't choose friends in prison. You find people who are broken the same way you are, and you survive together. As the years dragged on, I changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, like a rock sharpening under pressure. You start to see things differently. Every sound becomes information. Every face becomes a warning or a shield. Every day becomes a test you either pass or pay for. 7 years. 7 years of learning that anger can protect you, but it can kill you too. 7 years of realizing that the world outside doesn't pause just because your life shattered. 7 years of understanding that if you don't save yourself, you won't be saved at all. And somewhere in that time, something in me hardened. Not cold, not cruel, just numb. Like a fire that still burns, but refuses to give off light. I stopped expecting to hear my name called for visits. I stopped waiting for Hannah's voice, her explanations, her tears, her loyalty. I stopped believing she was ever going to come. Because she didn't. Not once. Sometimes at night I told myself she must be struggling too. That maybe she was scared. Maybe she was fighting for me in ways I couldn't see. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. If someone wants to stand with you, they will. Even if the whole world is falling apart around them. Then one afternoon, near the end of my sentence, I overheard something I wasn't supposed to hear. 2 officers were talking near the hallway. They didn't realize I was close enough to catch their voices. One of them said, "The girl, she's doing fine, better than fine. The rich guy protected her." The other laughed. "Yeah, she's living like nothing ever happened. Poor fool still thinks she's waiting for him." Their voices faded, but their words didn't. I froze. Everything inside me went silent. Like my heart needed a moment to understand what my ears had just heard. Protected by a rich guy. Living fine. Like nothing ever happened. What rich guy? Why was she living well while I was rotting here? Why did they talk like she was never in danger at all? The seed of doubt they planted wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was enough. Enough to make me question everything I thought I knew. Everything I went to prison for. Everything I believed about Hannah. For a long time, I stood there, staring at the wall, trying not to let the anger take over. Trying not to lose the last piece of myself that prison hadn't stolen. Richard's voice echoed in my mind. Calm, steady, unshaken. Not every enemy stands in front of you. Some stand behind you and smile. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the same concrete ceiling that greeted me 7 years earlier. Except now something was different. Hope wasn't the thing keeping me alive anymore. Pain was. Truth was. The fire inside me was no longer begging for rescue. It was waiting for answers. And then, finally, the day came. The gates opened. My name was called. 7 years in the dark had ended. But I didn't walk out like a free man. I walked out like someone who had been emptied, carved out, reshaped by pain and silence and betrayal. The sunlight didn't feel warm. The air didn't feel fresh. Freedom didn't feel like freedom. It felt like the beginning of something heavier. Because I wasn't the same man who walked in. I wasn't naive. I wasn't hopeful. I wasn't blindly loyal anymore. I was someone reborn in the worst way. Numb, wounded, and quietly burning inside. 7 years had changed me. But the truth waiting outside, that would change everything else. I returned home, and the world felt strange. Like a stage I had once performed on but could no longer touch. 7 years had passed. 7 years of cold walls, endless silence, and the slow gnaw of fear. Outside, life had moved on. Without me, People stared. Whispers followed me down streets I had once walked freely. My name was stained, spoken with curiosity, suspicion, or pity. Every step reminded me that I no longer belonged to the life I had left behind. The only comfort came from Olivia. She welcomed me without hesitation, without judgment, just presence. And Robert, ever steady, found me a small job, a way to anchor myself, a lifeline in a world that had forgotten me. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me that survival was still possible. I began to breathe again, slowly, carefully. Perhaps I could exist outside the shadow Hannah had cast over my life. Then she appeared, Hannah, and she was unrecognizable. Or perhaps it was me who had changed. She stepped out of a gleaming black car, surrounded by bodyguards, radiating power and confidence. She moved like someone who had left the past behind entirely, untouchable, untethered from the wreckage she had created in my life. Beside her was a man whose presence filled the air with authority. Zachary Miles, her husband, a billionaire, influential, untouchable. He didn't need words. His existence alone reshaped the world around him. Hannah looked at me and said calmly, "Thank you. 7 years of my life stolen." And her words were polite, detached, as if my suffering had been a favor to her. Something inside me snapped. Not a scream, not a roar, but a cold, sharp clarity. My pain didn't matter. She had moved on. Rumors began to trickle in almost immediately. Zachary had helped close Hannah's case. She had always been close to him. Wealth, influence, power, all protecting her while I had spent years in a cell. I met Rachel, Hannah's old friend. Nervous, hesitant, apologetic almost. Her words were careful, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the delicate illusion she wanted me to see. She didn't choose this life, Rachel murmured. She was forced into him, into everything. I wanted to believe her. I wanted a reason that made this not entirely Hannah's fault. But years of betrayal had taught me to doubt such explanations. My life hadn't paused. My suffering hadn't been random. I watched Hannah and Zachary together. Her laughter, the tilt of her head when she smiled, the ease of someone who had become untouchable while I had been trapped. And I understood something I had tried to ignore for years. My suffering wasn't an accident. It had been planned, carefully, purposefully. I thought of every silence, every unanswered call, every tear I had shed alone in my cell, every letter from Olivia that was my only tether to hope. And now I understood. Hannah had built a life for herself while leaving me in ruins. Rachel's words lingered. She was forced, perhaps, but she didn't choose me. She didn't fight for me. She didn't protect me. And that choice or absence of it was all I needed to know. My pain was real, my stolen years irreplaceable, and no one could change that. I tried talking to Robert, tried to piece the story together, to anchor myself in the fragments of truth I could still hold. But even he had no answers. My 7 lost years, my broken trust, the world I had been pulled from. It didn't fit into anyone else's story. I walked the streets I had once known. Cafes, shops, corners of my old neighborhood, they were the same, but I was not. The man who had trusted Hannah completely was gone. In his place stood someone hardened, quieter, quietly burning inside. One evening I saw Hannah again, with Zachary at her side, arms folded, commanding attention without effort. She looked at me with a calm smile, one that could convince anyone of innocence, and said again, "Thank you." No apology. No recognition of the devastation she had caused. Just gratitude, as if my imprisonment had been a service to her happiness. I walked away. Words were useless. Rage was meaningless. Only one truth remained, hardened over 7 years. My suffering had been intentional. Every silence, every tear, every stolen moment. It had been calculated. And the truth sank in. The world Hannah had built for herself was no accident. I had no role in it, except as the shadow she left behind. I returned to Olivia and Robert, to the fragments of life I could still salvage. But something inside me had shifted irrevocably. I would no longer wait for anyone to make things right. I would no longer allow betrayal to define me. My suffering had been planned, but the next steps were mine. And for the first time since prison, I understood. Survival wasn't just enduring. It was preparing for what comes next. 7 years of silence and lost time had left me hollow, but the fire inside never went out. I refused to let the truth stay buried. The world had moved on without me, but I wouldn't let it move on at my expense. I began chasing the truth relentlessly. Old streets, old faces, old whispers, they became my trail. I confronted former police officers who had investigated Hannah's case. I found people who had once been her friends. Anyone who had known her while I was imprisoned became a piece of the puzzle I was determined to solve. First, nothing fit. Every lead seemed blocked, every door locked. But patience, honed by 7 years of prison, taught me to look closer, to read the silences, the hesitations, the fleeting glances. Slowly, the dark puzzle began to take shape. Then she appeared, Fiona, Zachary's personal assistant. Quiet, careful, uneasy. Her loyalty to Zachary was brittle, and she hated how he destroyed lives. "I can't let him continue," Fiona whispered one evening, sliding a file across the table to me. "These are things he didn't want you to see. Use them carefully." The documents were shocking. Transfers, hidden evidence, manipulated testimonies. Everything pointed to a single truth. Zachary had orchestrated my imprisonment while protecting Hannah. For the first time, the pieces aligned. Every year lost, every lonely night, every unanswered letter. It had been deliberate. Then, unexpectedly, Officer Kyle appeared. Once confident, now hesitant, nervous. The same man who had interrogated me years ago seemed unsettled. He avoided my gaze, then admitted, "Parts of the case. They were adjusted. Someone powerful, someone wealthy, wanted Hannah free and you locked away. It wasn't justice, Ethan. It was manipulation. Confirmation at last. Proof. But it wasn't vindication, it was fuel. Anger, clarity, determination. The line I had been searching for was finally visible. I confronted Hannah privately. No yelling, no pleading. Silence carried the weight of years as she faced me. The life she had built just beyond my reach. Her hands trembled. Her face was pale, eyes wide with fear and guilt. She began, voice breaking. "I didn't want it to be like this. Zachary, he threatened my family. He promised protection, wealth, everything if I cooperated. I placed the evidence against you." Tears fell down her cheeks, but they didn't heal me. They didn't erase 7 years stolen. They didn't wash away the nights I cried alone, wondering if anyone remembered I existed. But they exposed her weakness, her fear, the reality that she was not brave. She was a survivor of her own cowardice. "You destroyed my life," I said quietly. "And you still think tears changed that?" She shook her head, unable to meet my eyes. I was scared. I had no choice. No choice, I echoed, feeling a cold fire build inside. "You had every choice. You chose your comfort over my life. You chose him. And now, you live untouched while I spent years counting every heartbeat, every second lost. That wasn't fate, Hannah. That was a plan." I left her trembling, her apologies meaningless, her tears powerless. She had revealed the truth, and yet it did nothing to undo the past. The fire inside me wasn't quenched, it was fanned. Then came the confrontation I had anticipated. Zachary Miles himself. He found me in the quiet office of a small cafe, a place I could think without prying eyes. He didn't storm in or shout. He smiled, polished, arrogant, dangerous. "Ethan," he said, calm, measured, "you've been digging in places you shouldn't. I have to say, you were easy to sacrifice. I didn't think you'd last this long. Pathetic, really." Every word hit like ice. He didn't threaten. He mocked. He reminded me that power wasn't just wealth, it was control, manipulation, untouchable influence. "You should stop," he continued. "Turn back. Some truths aren't meant to surface. Some people aren't meant to survive the digging." And yet, in his arrogance, he gave me clarity. Every sneer, Every condescending glance, every word he spoke made one thing clear. I was no longer the boy he had underestimated. I had been shaped, hardened, sharpened. 7 years of betrayal, prison, and loss had prepared me for this moment. "You think I'm easy to sacrifice?" I said, my voice steady, controlled. "You think I'll stop because you warn me? You underestimated one thing. I've survived what you could never imagine. I've endured what no one else could endure. And now I am ready, not just to survive, but to fight back." His smirk faltered for the first time. Fear shifted. It was no longer mine. Fiona's files, Officer Kyle's confession, Hannah's admission. They weren't just proof. They were weapons. Tools to expose the truth. Reclaim the life stolen from me, piece by piece. For the first time in 7 years, the fire inside me roared fully awake. Calm, patient, but unstoppable. The world had tried to bury me. They had tried to erase me. They had counted on my silence, my despair, my fear. They had been wrong. I walked away from that confrontation not as a victim, not as a shadow, but as a man who knew the truth. And armed with it, I was ready to take back everything. The war wasn't over. Not yet. But for the first time, I knew who held the cards. And that knowledge, sharp, precise, burning, was enough to make me unstoppable. The sun was just beginning to stretch across the skyline, painting the city in a soft glow I hadn't seen in 7 years. And for the first time in that long, suffocating stretch of time, I felt free. Not entirely free, perhaps, but enough to breathe. Enough to move forward without the weight of unanswered questions crushing me. 7 years had taken everything, my youth, my comfort, my sense of safety. But they hadn't taken my will. They hadn't taken my clarity. I had learned to survive. I had learned to endure. And now, with the evidence in my hands, I had learned how to fight back without becoming the kind of person who destroys to heal. Fiona had risked everything to give me the documents Zachary never wanted exposed. Officer Kyle had confessed his guilt, admitting that the case had been manipulated under pressure. And Rachel, Hannah's old friend, had finally confirmed what I already suspected. Hannah had been terrified, trapped by a man with power, and yet she had played her part. But the final piece came from Hannah herself. Broken, trembling, and scared in ways I could recognize only because I had once been that vulnerable. She handed me a folder. Files that proved, beyond any doubt, that Zachary had orchestrated every twist of the investigation, every planted piece of evidence, every false testimony. I didn't feel triumph when I held the papers. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt clarity. The path ahead was open. The lies had been exposed. The truth, long buried under manipulation and fear, was finally visible. Zachary didn't take it well. He tried to contact me, to threaten me, to make me fear the consequences. But he didn't understand the difference between the man he had destroyed in appearance and the man I had become in reality. 7 years of fear, pain, and betrayal had forged a strength he could never break. I no longer flinched at his voice, no longer shivered at his name. I didn't need to fight him physically. His empire of intimidation was built on fear, and I no longer possessed that weakness. The media storm that followed was relentless. Every headline, every article, every broadcast laid bare his manipulations. His carefully crafted image of untouchable power cracked and splintered under the weight of evidence and truth. It was a quiet kind of justice, visible, public, undeniable. Not the revenge of fists or fire, but the justice that corrodes lies and deceit, piece by piece. Hannah disappeared soon after. She left the city quietly, choosing to escape Zachary's grasp and start over somewhere far from me, far from the ghosts of the past. I didn't follow her, and I didn't seek answers. I did not forgive her, not fully, perhaps not ever, but I no longer carried hatred for her. Hatred is heavy. Hatred ties you to the past. I had spent 7 years learning to survive, and now I would spend the rest of my life learning to live. I walked the streets with a lightness I hadn't known in nearly a decade. Every face I passed, every building I passed, felt like a small triumph. Not over anyone else, but over the years I had lost. People stared at me. Some recognized me from old times. Some knew only the stories. Some whispered. Some avoided my gaze. But none of that mattered anymore. I was no longer defined by their perception. I was defined by my own reality. Robert had offered a quiet smile when I returned to him. Lily had hugged me so tightly that I felt the years fall away. Olivia's letters had been my lifeline through isolation, and I sent her one finally, not of grief or anger, but of gratitude and closure. The world wasn't mine yet, but it was open, and I had learned how to walk it with eyes wide open. I stood on a rooftop at sunrise, the wind cutting across my face. The city spread beneath me, vast, alive, indifferent, but full of possibility. 7 years of prison had taught me to breathe slowly, to feel cautiously, to measure every step. But standing here, with the sun brushing the horizon, I realized that measurement was no longer about survival. It was about life itself. I whispered to myself, letting the words linger in the cold morning air. My life starts today. Not revenge, not regret, not anger, just freedom. I let the warmth of the sun wash over me. For 7 years, I had been counting shadows, calculating threats, carrying wounds no one could see. But now the shadows were mine to leave behind. Now the wounds were mine to heal in my own time. The city hummed beneath me. Life was moving, unpredictable, chaotic. And yet I felt an unfamiliar calmness settle into my chest. This was my time, my choices, my actions. I had been broken, yes, but I had been rebuilt. Not by anyone else, not by luck, but by enduring the darkness and refusing to let it define me. Zachary's empire would crumble, Hannah would disappear, and the world would continue turning. But I was no longer waiting for anyone to save me. The years in prison had taught me a harsh lesson. No one comes for you. You must come for yourself. And now I had the files, the confessions, the media exposure. They were not tools for vengeance. They were symbols of truth reclaimed. They were evidence that the world could not erase me, could not bend me, could not silence me. I exhaled, deeply, fully. 7 years of pain, of betrayal, of loneliness, and of struggle had led to this. A single, quiet moment of clarity. I was free, not in the way the world might measure freedom, money, power, influence, but in the way that mattered most. Free from fear, free from hatred, free from the weight of a life stolen. The wind lifted my hair, the sun kissed the horizon, and for the first time in years, I smiled. Not because of triumph over others, but because of triumph over myself. No one had the power to define me anymore. My life was mine, entirely and irrevocably. And as I looked at the city stretching endlessly beneath me, I felt it for the first time in 7 years. Possibility. A deep, steady, unwavering possibility that I would live not in shadows or fear, but in the light I had finally earned. Not revenge, not regret, just freedom,